All right, welcome to a recap of lab today where we set up an unknown sample. Everybody had either sample 1 or sample 2. And let's see how we did. So this is our blood agar plate. This is our CNA, and this is our McConkey. All right, so the first thing we look at, and this was sample number 2. All right, so let's look at our blood agar plate closely. So how many organisms do we see? What's the colony morphology? I only see one type of colony, and to me they all look creamy and either white or maybe yellow-ish, okay? All right, on blood agar. And we have growth in the first quadrant. We have growth in the second quadrant. We have growth in the third quadrant and the fourth quadrant. So we have many creamy white or yellow colonies on our blood agar plate. So the next thing we look at is our CNA. This is the CNA plate. And what grows on CNA? Gram positive. All right, so we can look at these colonies and look back at our blood agar plate and see that this is the same thing. So this is our creamy white organism, and we know it is a gram-positive cocci. Okay, so that's our organism number 1 in sample 2, so 2-1. All right, do we have growth on McConkey? Is no growth. So we have no gram-negative bacteria. So what's the first test that we do on gram-positive? I'm going to switch colors. What's the first test that we do on gram-positive cocci? It is a catalase done using a slide with 1 drop of catalase reagent. Then you touch with a loop and wait for bubbles. So this was positive. We see bubbles. Okay. So what's the next test if we have a gram-positive, catalase-positive organism? It is the coagulase or staph latex reagent. You put 1 drop reagent on the cardboard card, then 1 healthy scoop of organism, and stir. And we have agglutination is positive. So what is our organism? Staph aureus. So number 1 organism has been identified as Staph aureus. Okay, so I forgot to take pictures of number 2, but now let's talk about our throat swabs. Now, I'm really glad we did this because this turned into kind of a mess. So we can tell that more than one person took the whole swab and swabbed the first quadrant with the swab, the second quadrant with the swab, the third quadrant, and fourth quadrant all with the swab. And you can tell we have no isolated colonies. And that is bad. That is not what we want. And again, no isolated colonies and no growth on McConkey. So what can we do? Here again, no isolated colonies. No isolated colonies on the blood agar or the CNA, and no growth on MacConkey. So what should we have done? All right, I'm going to get let's use yellow for the swab. So we should have taken our swab and inoculated the first quadrant. This is the first quadrant. Then we should have taken our blue loop, and let's use blue, and then using the blue loop, done some streaking for isolation. Okay, that's what we should have done, so that we had our first quadrant, second quadrant, third, and fourth, and then incubated that overnight. But that's not what happened. Okay, so for everybody, this one again is another throat culture. Throat again, and this person did use the loop to streak out, but again, we've done, I can't even tell which quadrant this is, and it looks like maybe this was the first, maybe this was the second, but it goes in a square. And we did get isolated colonies. I think this was the blood agar plate, this was the CNA, and this was the MacConkey, and no growth. So let's look individually. So there is some isolation, but it would be really hard to do a workup on anything that looks suspicious, because what we're having to do is we need to look at this and see how many different colonies do we see. All right, I see this type. This looks like a alpha clear. This looks like a white, creamy maybe. This looks like a different kind of white colony. There's at least 3. Oh, and here's 4. Here's a big yellow colony. And actually this one over here, this one looks a little different. But what we're looking for is beta hemolysis and alpha hemolysis that is mucoid. So we see a lot of alpha hemolysis. So this is definitely alpha, is the green. It's hard to see any beta here, but we did have some isolation. So we would have, if we saw a suspect colony, we would touch just the colony and then sub that out to a plate using our quadrant streak. Okay, and here is the CNA. That's a little better with the isolation, but then again, it's in a square, so that's not what we want, and no growth on MacConkey. All right, here, this was one of the better ones that we saw today. Again, this was the throat culture on blood agar, CNA, and MacConkey. So let's take a close-up look. All right, this looks really nice. So we can tell this is our first quadrant, second quadrant, third, fourth, and we have some isolated colonies. So how many different colony types do we see? 1, 2, for sure. 2 for sure. But this is all alpha hemolysis back here. And you can't see any beta hemolysis, but what you're looking for is beta hemolysis and green mucoid colonies, and we don't see any, so all this would be normal flora. And the point is, you don't want to work up normal flora, so you don't work up normal flora. All right, and here again, this is so that was the blood agar plate maybe, and this was the CNA. But there's some really nice isolations. So this would be first quadrant, third, second, fourth. All right. So we'll stop here and I will do some more, take some more pictures tomorrow.